the slope of the mountain is like this. I'm up here, and I turn and I look, and down slope is when I saw Bigfoot walk off the pages of myth and legend into reality.
The idea of anthropoid cryptids is nothing new. They're human-like, but not exactly human. Not entirely ape, not entirely civilized. Elusive, but out there, or so people claim. But when large language models, such as Google's AI, were fed every Bigfoot sighting since 1958, the pattern became hard to ignore. What we found were tight geographic clusters, repeating timelines, and consistent behavioral descriptions across decades. This pattern shouldn't exist in the context of an urban legend. This is where the real question begins. What should we make of these sightings? Is the elusive Bigfoot really out there? And if so, where exactly? Bluff Creek and the birth of Bigfoot. In the summer of 1958, in the Bluff Creek region of Humboldt County, Northern California, a bulldozer operator named Jerry Crew arrived at a logging site deep inside the Six Rivers National Forest. The job was routine: clear land, move earth, and push deeper into timber country. But that day, in the soft mud near the construction zone, Crew and his colleagues noticed something. Footprints, human-like but large and deeply impressed into the soil. They measured roughly 16 inches in length, far exceeding any normal human track, with visible toe impressions and a stride that suggested something walking upright. Crew documented it. Plaster casts were made, preserving the shape and depth of the prints, and photographs were taken. When the local newspaper, the Humboldt Times, published the story, journalist Andrew Genzoli gave the phenomenon a name: Bigfoot. By late 1958, the term had spread beyond Humboldt County into national headlines, becoming a cultural phenomenon. But the prints didn't stop. Between 1958 and 1963, Bluff Creek became a recurring site of discovery. Logging crews working the same corridor, stretching between Orleans and Willow Creek, reported new tracks appearing overnight. They came in clusters, sometimes dozens at a time, ranging from 12 to 17 inches in length. The consistency was unsettling. The stride length remained proportionate to a tall, upright figure. The depth of the impressions suggested significant weight, often deeper than what a human boot would leave under similar conditions. Workers began to mark and measure them, comparing notes across crews, watching for patterns. And patterns did emerge, at least on the surface. Tracks appeared along logging roads, near riverbanks, and in freshly disturbed soil where visibility was highest. Some workers claimed more than just footprints. There were reports of heavy equipment being moved, such as oil drums weighing up to 450 pounds being shifted from their original positions. Fences were said to have been damaged or pulled apart in remote sections of the site. The geography also mattered. Bluff Creek sits within a dense network of redwood forests, steep ridges, and erosion-cut river valleys. Logging operations had only recently begun to penetrate deeper into this terrain, carving roads through previously undisturbed areas. This created a unique observational window: soft, exposed soil for track visibility, combined with limited human presence and low line-of-sight conditions. In practical terms, it was the perfect environment for ambiguous evidence to appear. By the early 1960s, the Bluff Creek-Willow Creek corridor had effectively become ground zero for Bigfoot reports, but it had all actually started in 1952. It was in that year, along a remote stretch near Orleans in Northern California, that a driver reported something stepping out of the dark and toward the highway. It was supposed to be a large, upright figure, moving on two legs, approaching the vehicle with what the witness later described as aggressive intent. There was no photograph, no physical trace preserved, no official report filed at the time. The account would only surface in years. This was 6 years before the term Bigfoot existed in print, before any standardized description had taken hold. Whatever the driver thought he saw, he didn't yet have a name for it. When the Bigfoot legend took off, more sightings were reported. Between 1958 and 1959, multiple civilian reports followed a consistent structure. A large, hair-covered figure crossed rural roads at dusk or nighttime, visible briefly before disappearing into forest cover. Locations such as Bear Creek and Martin's Ferry Hill appeared repeatedly in accounts, both situated along sparsely populated routes with limited lighting and heavy surrounding vegetation. These conditions reduced visibility and depth perception, particularly at transitional hours when shadows lengthened and movement was harder to judge accurately. During the same period, a private pilot reportedly observed what were described as track-like formations from the air, extending across a stretch of forested terrain. The account circulated locally and later entered secondary compilations of sightings, but no flight logs, photographs, or independent verification accompanied the claim. The report remained unconfirmed, but the idea persisted in later retellings. From 1960 to 1963, reported encounters shifted toward areas closer to habitation zones, particularly around East Orleans. Several nighttime sightings were documented in regional accounts, including one attributed to a resident named Benjamin Wilder. The report described a large upright figure observed at night, moving through the landscape in a controlled, non-random manner. The distance allowed recognition of general posture, but not detailed features. No interaction occurred, and the figure moved away without altering course. Across these early accounts, a consistent structural pattern emerged. Each sighting occurred under reduced visibility conditions, night, dusk, or heavily shaded forest environments. Each involved a brief observation window in which a figure crossed a boundary, such as a road, clearing, or edge of sight. Each ended with disappearance into obstructed terrain before extended verification could occur. No case included prolonged tracking, repeated observation of the same individual, or recoverable physical evidence tied directly to a specific encounter. Despite their isolation, descriptions began to converge over time. By the early 1960s, witnesses independently reported similar physical characteristics. A tall, upright figure, often estimated above 6 feet in height, covered in dark hair, and moving with a bipedal gait that did not fully align with known human or animal movement patterns. Variation between accounts existed in detail, but not in overall structure. Despite the increasing frequency of reports, no conclusive evidence emerged. Then came 1967. The Patterson-Gimlin event. On the afternoon of October 20th, 1967, at roughly 1:15 to 1:40 p.m., two men on horseback, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, rode along a sandbar near a bend in Bluff Creek, a tributary feeding into the Klamath River system. The location sat about 25 miles northwest of Orleans, in rugged terrain carved by water flow and logging access roads. The conditions were clear enough for visibility, but the environment remained constrained. Tree lines, brush, and uneven ground limited what could be seen beyond immediate range. According to both men, one of the horses got spooked suddenly as something large appeared near the creek. Patterson lost control and fell as the horse reared, while Gimlin managed to stay mounted but pulled back. What they saw in those first seconds would define everything that followed. A large, upright figure moving across the sandbar, partially turned away, walking with a steady, unhurried gait. The distance was close enough to distinguish form, but not enough to resolve detail instantly. In any case, there was no time to analyze. Patterson moved fast. He reached for a handheld 16mm Kodak Cine Kodak camera he had been carrying, loaded with color film. Within seconds, he began filming. What he captured lasted just under a minute, approximately 59 seconds, and was later calculated to contain around 954 individual frames. The footage shows the figure moving left to right across the frame, arms swinging, legs extending in a stride that appears proportionate to a tall, upright body. Midway through the sequence, the figure turns its head toward the camera, briefly but clearly enough to become the most analyzed moment in the entire film. The figure itself became the center of immediate scrutiny. Patterson and Gimlin estimated its height between 6 and 7 feet, possibly taller based on stride length and surrounding reference points. The body appeared covered in hair, described as dark, ranging from black to reddish-brown depending on lighting and film interpretation. The proportions were notable: long arms extending past the hips, a broad torso, and a forward-leaning posture during movement. The gait did not match a simple run or walk. It was steady, without the abrupt acceleration typically seen in startled animals. Previous reports had been static: footprints, brief sightings, isolated descriptions. This was a sequence. Frame by frame, analysts could measure stride length, estimate speed, and compare limb motion. The head turn, often called the look back, became a focal point because it introduced a moment of apparent awareness. The figure did not run immediately. It did not charge. It continued moving, glancing back as if assessing the presence behind it. Patterson-Gimlin later returned from the site with the film intact and began moving it through a chain of local contacts. The first stop was Willow Creek, the nearest hub familiar with earlier Bluff Creek reports. From there, the film was taken to Eureka, a larger city on the California coast, where processing facilities and media connections were available. Within days, the footage began circulating beyond the immediate region. One of the first figures Patterson attempted to involve was Donald Abbott, a well-known big game hunter and tracker. Abbott, however, declined direct involvement after reviewing the material, though accounts differ on the extent of his evaluation. What is clear is that Patterson sought validation from individuals with field expertise, not just media outlets. As the film spread, it entered a wider analytical space. Copies were made, projected, slowed down, and examined frame by frame. Researchers began measuring the distance between footprints visible in the sandbar, comparing them to the figure's stride in the film. Estimates suggested a stride length exceeding 40 inches in some frames, larger than the average human stride, but not outside the range of possibility under certain conditions. Some saw it as the strongest visual evidence ever recorded of an unknown primate. Others saw it as a staged performance, possibly involving a person in a costume. No immediate consensus emerged, but the film did become the reference point against which all future Bigfoot claims would be measured. But this was not all. You had to see it to believe it. By the summer of 1967, the Bluff Creek corridor was no longer quiet. Weeks before the famous October filming, tracks started appearing along the same rough network of logging roads and mountain routes. In August and September, crews working near Blue Creek Mountain, just outside the Bluff Creek drainage, reported a fresh series of footprints pressed into soft soil. These weren't vague impressions. Measurements taken on-site placed them between 13 and 15 inches in length, with visible toe structure and stride spacing that suggested upright movement. The location sat inside the same narrow geographic band that had been producing reports since 1958. The difference this time was who showed up to look. Within days, investigators began arriving. These names would become central to Bigfoot research for decades. John Green traveled from British Columbia, bringing notebooks and cameras, documenting track placement and depth. René Dahinden followed, already known for his insistence on physical evidence over anecdote. And then there was Bob Titmus, a skilled tracker who approached the site with field discipline, measuring stride length, mapping track direction, and attempting to follow the trail beyond the initial discovery points. The tracks appeared in clusters, often along road cuts where heavy machinery had disturbed the soil. Some led into dense forest and vanished where the ground hardened or vegetation thickened. Others seemed to loop or overlap, making it difficult to determine a clear direction of travel. The measurements remained consistent with earlier Bluff Creek finds: large, human-like, but outside normal human proportions. The investigators disagreed on interpretation, but not on the basic observation. Something was leaving repeated, measurable impressions in the same region, within a compressed time window. That time window matters. Between June and October 1967, multiple independent track discoveries were reported across the Bluff Creek, Blue Creek, Willow Creek zone. Not all were documented with the same rigor, and not all were investigated directly. But the clustering was later used to argue that the region experienced a concentrated period of activity. Whether that reflects an actual increase in events or simply an increase in attention is still debated. What is clear is that by the time October arrived, the area was already under watch. Roads were being checked more frequently. Reports were being taken more seriously. The ground was, quite literally, being examined. Following the October 20th Patterson-Gimlin event, Grover Krantz, a physical anthropologist, was drawn to analyze the evidence. He would spend years examining the film. Krantz approached it from an anatomical perspective, studying limb proportions, joint articulation, and gait mechanics. He argued that certain aspects of the movement, particularly the fluidity of the stride and the apparent extension of the arms, did not match a typical human wearing a costume. However, behind the scenes, Roger Patterson began selling distribution rights to the footage, but not always with clear exclusivity. Multiple agreements were made with different parties, creating overlapping claims over who had the legal right to show, copy, or profit from the film. This led to disputes that persisted for years. Copies multiplied, quality degraded, and the chain of custody became harder to track. By the end of 1967, the Bluff Creek sequence had expanded into something larger than a single event. Tracks had been documented by multiple investigators in the months leading up to October. A film had been captured, processed, and broadcast across national media. Scientific analysis had begun, but without consensus. But as the decades turned, the approach to Bigfoot also evolved. Bigfoot Database, Institutionalization, BFRO, and Modern Cataloging. By the early 1990s, after decades of scattered reports, photocopied newsletters, and investigator notebooks, the Bigfoot phenomenon became institutionalized. At the center of that transition was the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, founded in 1995 by Matt Moneymaker. Yes, that was his actual name. The objective here was not to prove or disprove anything outright, but to do something that had never been done at scale: collect, classify, and standardize Bigfoot sighting reports across North America into a single searchable system. Before BFRO, data existed in fragments. Reports were buried in local newspapers, private archives, or word-of-mouth accounts that rarely traveled beyond regional boundaries. BFRO changed that by building a centralized database, eventually compiling thousands of entries from the United States and Canada. By the early 2000s, the organization had logged over 2,000 reports. By the 2020s, that number had grown to more than 5,000 publicly accessible cases, with additional submissions under review. Each report was assigned a case number, location coordinates, date, and narrative description. Sightings were divided into two primary categories: Class A and Class B. Class A reports were defined as clear visual encounters, where witnesses claimed to have seen a creature in sufficient detail to distinguish its form, movement, and features. Class B reports covered indirect evidence, such as sounds, tracks, objects being thrown, or brief glimpses lacking full visual confirmation. However, a closer look at the database shows that Class A reports, despite being labeled clear, are still overwhelmingly brief, often lasting seconds. Many occur under low-light conditions, such as dusk, night, or heavy forest cover, where visual clarity is inherently limited. Class B reports, meanwhile, dominate the dataset in volume, including thousands of accounts of vocalizations, wood knocks, and track discoveries without direct observation. Geographically, the BFRO database reinforced patterns that had been noted informally for decades. High-density clusters appear in the Pacific Northwest, such as in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, as well as the Appalachian region, including states like Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Texas and Florida also show significant report counts. By the mid-2010s, Washington state alone had logged over 600 reports, more than any other state in the database. But these numbers correlate strongly with forest cover, population distribution, and outdoor activity levels, raising the question of whether the clusters reflect actual event concentration or simply where observations are most likely to occur. The data itself carries a consistent signature. Reports vary widely in detail. Some include precise measurements, environmental conditions, and timelines, while others are short narratives with minimal context. Yet across thousands of entries, certain structural patterns repeat. A large figure seen briefly, crossing a road or moving along a tree line. A witness alone or in a small group. An encounter ending with the figure disappearing into dense cover. Also, it is important to note that many BFRO reports are retrospective, with witnesses recounting events months or even years after they occurred. Some date back decades, entered into the database long after the original sighting. This introduces a temporal gap between observation and documentation, where memory reconstruction, external influence, and narrative shaping can occur. A witness in 2005 describing an event from 1985 is not just recalling a moment. They are reconstructing it through the lens of everything they've encountered since. Cross-source inconsistency becomes visible when comparing reports side by side. Two accounts from similar locations and time periods may differ in key details, such as height estimates, coloration, and behavior, while still aligning in overall structure. This creates a paradox: high-level similarity combined with low-level variation. In data terms, it suggests that while the narrative template is stable, the underlying observations are not uniform. That tension sits at the core of the dataset. BFRO also introduced a layer of investigator mediation. Submitted reports are often reviewed, edited, and sometimes condensed before publication. Investigators may contact witnesses for clarification, but the final entry is not always a verbatim transcript. It is a curated version of the account, shaped to fit the database format. This standardization improves readability and comparability, but it also filters the raw data, potentially smoothing out inconsistencies or emphasizing certain elements over others. As the database grew, it became a reference system, and this curated collection also led to a complete reframing of the legend. Was Bigfoot hunting people out there in the remote wilderness? The missing 411 framework. In the late 2000s, a former police officer turned author, David Paulides, started assembling a series of casebooks under a single label, Missing 411. The premise was simple but charged: pull together wilderness disappearances across North America that didn't fit neatly into standard explanations. By 2012, the first volume was published, and over the next decade, the series expanded into multiple books and 2 documentaries, each adding more cases drawn largely from U.S. national parks and surrounding wilderness. The geography of those cases was not evenly distributed. Certain parks appeared again and again. Yosemite National Park, with its granite cliffs and deep valleys, featured prominently. Olympic National Park, a dense temperate rainforest with limited visibility and heavy rainfall, formed another cluster. On the opposite side of the country, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the most visited national park in the United States, drawing over 12 million visitors annually, became a third focal point. These locations were high-traffic wilderness zones. The cases themselves followed a pattern. In the books and lectures by David Paulides, the emphasis is not just on what happened, but on what didn't happen afterward. No body recovered, no clear trajectory, or no explanation that fully closes the case. One of the most frequently discussed examples comes from Yosemite National Park. In 2011, a German tourist named Anja separated briefly from her group near the Vernal Falls, Nevada Falls trail system. According to compiled accounts, she moved only a short distance off-trail before disappearing in a highly trafficked area that typically sees heavy foot movement during summer months. Despite rapid response from park rangers and coordinated search efforts, no conclusive trace was recovered within the immediate search radius. The terrain, dotted with granite slopes, water channels, and drop-offs, was later cited in official summaries as a key limiting factor in trace retention and visibility. A different type of case comes from Olympic National Park, where dense rainforest conditions create extreme visibility constraints. In 1998, Norman, an experienced solo hiker, was last observed near a trail system feeding into the Hoh River corridor. Search teams later noted that tracking conditions were severely degraded due to constant rainfall and saturated ground. Canine units struggled to maintain any continuous scent trail beyond short distances, particularly near river crossings where scent dispersion is naturally disrupted. Despite multi-day searches, the case remained unresolved. In the southeastern United States, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park appears repeatedly in compiled datasets. One frequently cited incident occurred in 2015 involving a 66-year-old hiker, Gary. He went missing after leaving a designated trail area near the Deep Creek region. Search operations included ground teams and aerial surveillance, covering rugged forest terrain and steep elevation zones. Officials later concluded that environmental exposure and terrain disorientation were the most likely explanations, though no definitive remains were recovered at the time of initial reporting. Another recurring pattern in Paulides' compilations involves children disappearing in extremely short time windows in high-traffic recreational areas. A widely discussed case is that of Dennis Martin, a 6-year-old who disappeared in 1969 in the Spence Field area of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He was last seen near a group of adults and other children during a family outing. Witness accounts suggest he moved out of sight within a very short interval, possibly seconds to minutes. Despite one of the largest search operations in the park's history at the time, no trace evidence was recovered in the immediate aftermath. Meanwhile, in the Sierra Nevada region, cases often involve rapid loss of contact in rugged alpine terrain. A 2008 incident in California's Desolation Wilderness involved an experienced outdoorsman, Jason, who separated from his group during a day hike. Weather conditions shifted quickly, and visibility dropped in forested sections near Granite Lake. Search teams later documented difficulty in establishing a directional movement pattern, as terrain features such as granite slabs and scattered tree cover interrupted tracking continuity. Across multiple cases, one recurring detail in Missing 411 compilations is the absence or separation of clothing items, particularly footwear. In certain Appalachian region incidents, shoes or boots are found at distances from the presumed point of disappearance. However, in official search and rescue interpretations, such findings are typically explained through environmental factors such as water movement, scavenger activity, or decomposition processes that separate clothing from remains over time. The interpretation differs depending on whether the case is viewed through investigative summaries or formal forensic reporting. Another structural element is the role of search limitations. In many Yosemite and Olympic National Park cases, search teams operate in terrain where line of sight is extremely restricted, sometimes under 20 meters in dense forest. Helicopter surveys are often limited by canopy cover, and ground teams must navigate unstable terrain, river systems, and elevation changes. Even in coordinated searches involving dozens or hundreds of personnel, detection probability decreases significantly after the first 48 to 72 hours, especially in wet or mountainous environments. When David Paulides began compiling wilderness disappearance cases, he was building a catalog of incidents he believed shared unusual traits: people vanishing quickly, searches yielding little trace, and outcomes that didn't always fit standard wilderness explanations like hypothermia, falls, or exposure. Over time, that catalog became a curated data set. That distinction matters because North America records thousands of wilderness incidents every year. Most of them resolve in familiar ways. Some hikers are found quickly after getting lost. Some cases end in confirmed accidents, environmental exposure, or medical emergencies. Others are recovered after coordinated search operations, but those cases rarely appear in the Missing 411 framework. The focus is almost exclusively on the unresolved or unusual ones. As the cases accumulated, maps started appearing, showing where these disappearances occurred. Clusters emerged in places like Yosemite National Park, Olympic National Park, and Great Smoky Mountains National Park. These are vast wilderness regions with dense forests, steep terrain, and limited visibility. On their own, that isn't unusual. They are also among the most heavily visited and most difficult to navigate landscapes in the United States. But then, people began overlaying missing 411 locations with Bigfoot sighting databases, particularly those compiled by groups like the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. Both datasets appeared to cluster in similar broad regions: the Pacific Northwest, the Appalachian Corridor, remote forest systems across the Rockies. However, many argue that the overlap doesn't require a shared cause. It can just as well emerge from shared conditions. In any case, we'll let AI decide the rest. What does computational and AI analysis tell us? By the late 2000s and into the 2010s, researchers, hobbyists, and data scientists started feeding decades of Bigfoot reports into computational systems. The tools used were standard methods from data science, even the kind routinely applied in fields like geography, biology, or economics. But the material they were applied to was far less structured than those fields usually deal with. For example, DBSCAN, which stands for Density-Based Spatial Clustering of Applications with Noise, is a method that looks for natural groupings in data without being told in advance how many groups should exist. It works by scanning a map of points and identifying places where many points are tightly packed together, while treating isolated points as noise or outliers. In this context, it would be used to see whether sightings or cases naturally form geographic clusters rather than being evenly spread out. K-means clustering is another grouping method, but it works differently. Instead of discovering clusters on its own, it forces the data into a set number of groups chosen beforehand. Each data point is assigned to the nearest center, and the algorithm keeps adjusting those centers until the groups stabilize. In simple terms, it is like dividing all locations into a fixed number of regions based on similarity and seeing where each case fits best. Kernel density estimation, or KDE, often used for heat maps, takes scattered individual points and turns them into a smooth visual surface. Instead of just plotting dots on a map, it calculates where points are concentrated and creates hot zones where activity is denser. The brighter or more intense an area looks on a heat map, the more data points are clustered there. So, taken together, these tools are just different ways of answering the same basic question. Where do things tend to cluster? How do they group together? And what patterns can be seen when you step back and smooth out the noise? Next, thousands of reports, many pulled from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, each tagged with coordinates, dates, and narrative descriptions, became inputs for algorithms designed to find structure in chaos. When the models ran, the first patterns were immediate. Sightings clustered, yes, but not randomly. AI analysis of Bigfoot reports found clear patterns. Sightings tended to cluster near roads, trails, and forest access points instead of deep wilderness. In places like Washington State, with hundreds of BFRO reports, clusters aligned closely with forest road networks and recreation areas. Similar patterns appeared in Ohio and Kentucky along rural highways and farmland edges. Also, reports increased in late summer and fall, usually July through October, matching peak outdoor activity seasons such as hiking, camping, and hunting. In the Pacific Northwest, spikes often aligned with hunting season, when more people enter remote forest zones. Natural language processing also found repeated phrases across decades, such as large, hairy biped, broad shoulders, and quick retreat into woods. But it is important to note that AI only detected structure in how humans report and describe experiences. This cannot, by itself, be taken as evidence of what caused these experiences. The picture stays unresolved. Like the coelacanth, once thought extinct and later rediscovered, it reminds us that the absence of evidence is not always final, but it also sits alongside a long history of misidentifications and hoaxes that can produce similar patterns. For now, Bigfoot remains in that uncertain space between pattern and proof. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, Don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.